Welcome back to another episode of the Trail and Ultra Running Training Podcast. My name is Will France. I'm a running coach and a strength coach, and the whole goal of this podcast is to help you train a little better so that you can have more fun out on the trails. Today, we're going to talk about the next piece of our strength training series. I think we're on part 6. I don't know. Life is a fever dream. I think we're at episode 164 or something, and we're going to talk about stability and mobility today. And first off, like a lot of people get touchy about these terms. So if that's, and I think partially that's because we try to get our information from 30-second sound bites on the internet. And if we stop doing that, we'd probably be able to actually develop a common language or stop caring about what like we call them and then figure out exactly how to train them to make ourselves a little better. Anyway, if you appreciate this conversation on stability, mobility, flexibility, that kind of stuff that we can achieve with strength training, then please subscribe. I think that's the thing that makes the biggest difference now. And if you don't want to do that, leave a rating or review or just share it with another human. That'd be really cool as well. So today, let's talk about stability and mobility. And very honestly, like I'm not even fully sure I know what I mean by these terms. I think it's one of those like I know it when I see it kind of things. So first, let's talk about stability and define this a little bit. First, we confuse stability and balance. And practically speaking, these things are a little inextricable because to some degree they both often mean that we're going to fall down. But functionally, or like how we train them or where the actual thing is coming from, they are different because balance technically comes from like our eyes and our brain. A large portion, I don't think it's all of it, but a large portion of balance comes from the like cerebral neural connection between our brain, or sorry, the eye connection to our brain, right? Like it's how we see, it's how we make um, quick snap judgments. If our eyes aren't working very well, then our balance tends to be pretty bad. If our vision isn't very good, then we don't tend to be very good athletes because we can't see and we can't do athlete things when we can't see. And some markers of a really good athlete are the ability to like separate your vision from what you're physically doing, right? Like think a football player running at 20 miles an hour down a field and like looking over his shoulder and somehow managing to still like catch the ball while maintaining a straight path. Wild thing to do. And same thing with like running on trails. If you're able to constantly scan around, and not have to stare at your feet to know that you're not going to trip over a rock, that's going to make you a better athlete. And it's really hard to do, which is why the like balance part and or vision part can take a while. This is also one of the things that we can really get back though. So when I'm talking about like 70 or talking to 70 or 80-year-olds in the gym and they're struggling with like what they might refer to as stability or what's more accurately going to be balance, that is often just a like brain not talking to the eyes very well. And we'll have a conversation where I maybe suggest that they start brushing their teeth while standing on one leg. And if they do that, then their balance gets a lot better and they're a lot less likely to fall down. Because while we have not necessarily gotten them a ton stronger in the span of a couple weeks, we have taught their eyes to communicate better with the brain. And that means that they're going to fall down less, which is what we're looking for, right? So balance largely going to be an eye to brain connection thing, and stability is going to be much more muscular and a muscle to brain connection thing. Now, one way to think about stability is going to be strength, and I'm not sure that's completely wrong. I don't think it's entirely right because I think balance plays into stability. I think it's a like larger, probably more complicated set of things, but we do need to be strong in order to be stable. And at the very least, we need to be strong in certain ranges of motion or certain positions to be stable, right? So if we're thinking about a single leg squat, some of that is going to be my ability to push my entire body weight up with one leg and my glutes and etc. And some of that is just going to be my ability to not fall down while I push my entire body weight up with one leg and glutes, etc. So stability is going to be a muscular thing as well. Now we can train this through specific stability drills or doing certain things on like unstable surfaces or a Bosu ball, or we can just pair it with some other stuff. And I'm going to get back to that in a second. But when we look at stability, it is going to be a mixture of things like balance, and it is going to be a mixture of things like balance and strength, right? Now, if we look at flexibility, this is just going to purely be range of motion. From a perspective of like yoga, we can have passive flexibility. Somebody else can probably put you into a flexible position if we're thinking like physical therapy or whatever. Um, and this is necessary. It's almost a precursor to something like mobility, right? If we look at a Thomas test, this is where you're going to lay on the edge of a bench or a couch or a PT's table and hug one of your knees and let the other leg flop off the end and see what your range of motion is in your hip and see what hip extension you have. And if you have shitty hip extension, then you're not going to be able to run very well because you're not going to be able to use your glutes, right? So we need to have that extension, that flexibility in order to have mobility and strength in places that we need. You could also do a couch stretch. Look that up if you don't know what it is. I have a video of it on YouTube, so do a bunch of people. I think Kelly Starrett made it up. If not, he at least popularized it. And it is just a brutal hip flexor, like rectus femoris and psoas stretch. And if we can't really do that, we're probably not going to run very well. And we're probably not going to be able to do very good walking lunges because we need to be able to create hip extension to get there, right? And a lot of the flexibility stuff it doesn't take eternally long. It's just kind of a commitment to time and a little bit of unpleasantness, right? Like I had a kid who I'm training at the gym a few weeks ago. When he bent over at the waist, he could barely reach past his knees. Been doing strength training twice a week. We have ended every session with like 3 minutes of hamstring stretching in various positions, and he touched his feet this week. It doesn't need to be a lot. It doesn't need to be um, super tedious. I mean, those 3 minutes are not particularly pleasant. And when we look at something like flexibility, like I think a lot of us do a stretch for 20 seconds at the end of a run and wonder why we're not more flexible. And that's just not realistic. You need to think about this like strength training. If you want to improve your flexibility, it needs to be like graded progress over time, much like you're not going to improve, like get a 300-pound back squat in the span of 2 weeks. You're probably not going to get a middle split in the span of 2 weeks. And you're probably not going to get a 300-pound back squat without doing some really unpleasant squat sessions. Same with like end ranges of flexibility. Thankfully, you don't need end ranges of flexibility to run well. You just need a decent amount of flexibility and then control over that range of motion, right? So for me, my adductors tend to be really tight and really tight for a wide variety of reasons. One of them being I don't stretch them, and I don't stretch them because it hurts, and it hurts for a lot of reasons. One, I'm inflexible, um, and two, my MCLs are both at least somewhat damaged. They seem to exist. They don't seem to exist in the way that I once had them, and as a result, it hurts my knees to stretch like adductors or groin or however you want to view that. Now, there are other ways to do that, and to some degree, that's just an excuse. For me, if I actually cared about improving that range of motion, which I'm starting to for no real reason other than I want to, um, then just need to stretch, and I need to stretch for a couple minutes, a few times a week, do some graded progressions, put the work in, and get there, just like we would with strength. And it's just going to be a process. Building flexibility is as much of a process as building strength or getting better at running or whatever else. It's not going to happen in 20 seconds at the end of your run. Now, If you want some really good advice on this stuff, a good thing is going to be Range of Strength is a really good account to follow on Instagram. He's great. He does a bunch of weird lifts, super interesting dude, and he really improves a lot of people's flexibility. And I've been following him for a while, and you should check him out if you don't already. Now, mobility is going to be our control over that range of motion. If we look at something like a wall test, this is a good example of like flexibility versus mobility. If I put my arm up back into this like extension or like sit back on a wall where my hands are up against the wall, my wrists, elbows, etc. are up against the wall, and I would almost guarantee that if somebody took my wrist here and pulled it backwards, I would have more range of motion. I'd have more flexibility without quite tearing my rotator cuff. But I can only get back so far. Now we can improve that, and that control over that range of motion would be mobility, right? It is how much you can actively control. We're thinking like passive versus active range of motion. It's how we're going to distinguish flexibility versus mobility. Now, for mobility, this is where the like strength component of stuff comes in. A lot of the time, someone can be very flexible. It's often even called like hypermobility of your joints, but they might not actually have the strength to control that range of motion. So, kind of depends where we're lacking as to where we need to make improvements. For me, for something like my adductors, I need to be more flexible because they're very tight. For someone else, they may be really flexible. They may be able to like forward fold completely chest to knees and put their hands and palms flat on the ground, but not actually be able to do anything with that range of motion. Like they might not be able to do in any weight on a Romanian deadlift, despite the fact that they can get lower than the average person on that movement pattern, right? So it's kind of depends where we're lacking. Now, as far as how like once we know those things, how do we train these things? Well, it kind of depends what you have time for, right? How new you are to training. Let's look at stability. If we have balance issues, if it's really bad, we can just stand on one leg a lot. Like we can do that right now as I record this, and it wouldn't really affect anything. And that's a thing that I could do from a stability standpoint. Now, if you're already somewhat stable, we just need to improve it. We can do a lot of one-legged strength movements. And from a practical standpoint of trail running, we can push the downhills to a, let's say, edge or like inside edge of a comfort zone. And that is going to really help. Or we can run on unstable surfaces. Like if you have routes that are particularly rocky or rooty or whatever, we can use those to help build our functional stability in the sport that we care about, right? Now, I try not to overmix the two, like between strength and stability. I think that something like a Bulgarian split squat is one of the better movements out there for strength. It sucks, but if we lean forward, really drive through the whole foot, it is a mildly unstable movement that will help you get incredibly strong while also reinforcing stable patterns that have a lot of crossover to running. Now, that does not mean that unstable and strong should always be combined. Doing a really heavy back squat on a Bosu ball is largely insane. I actually don't see where we would have a ton of sport crossover for that in any realm. Doing squats on a Bosu ball unloaded, I would only ever do for like a skateboarder or a surfer. Now, loaded heavy squats on a Bosu ball make zero sense to me. I'm happy to have this conversation, but I think this has been phased out of most of the things. This was very popular in the 90s and early 2000s, and I think we've moved away from that for very good reasons because it doesn't work well. And if we separate these things a little bit and train on strength on stable surfaces so that we can actually get stronger, then we'll do a little better, right? Now we can maybe get creative sometimes, but unless we can deadlift maybe significantly more than your body weight, then maybe let's build up to that first before we start doing single leg deadlifts on a Bosu ball. 99% of the time, the stability is just going to come as a side effect of like strength movements like Bulgarians or single leg deadlifts or whatever. Now, from a flexibility mobility standpoint, a lot of runners are kind of tight, and I don't think that's news to anybody. If you have decent mobility, and I'm going to clarify mobility and not flexibility here, then really all we have to do is strength movements in that range of motion to keep it. A good example is an overhead press. To do a good overhead press, we need to have good shoulder extension, meaning I need to be able to put my arm over my head without flaring into my low back. So my rib cage and pelvis are stacked, my arms over my head, and my biceps like right by my ear, if not even a little bit behind it. If I can't get into that position, then I need to do work, do flexibility work to get into that position. And it might be a mixture of flexibility and mobility work. It's very possible that some of the muscles in my back are weak. It's also very possible that my shoulder is inflexible. So doing some work in that range to get there and gain access to that will be necessary. And then while I'm doing that, we will build strength in the shoulder without pressing directly overhead. Because if you don't have shoulder extension and you press something directly up in the air, all you're going to be doing is putting it into your low back. So why? Let's build strength in the range of motion we have and then gain access to the range of motion separately. Once we have it though, we don't need to do a lot of that mobility work anymore. It's already there. All you need to do is press heavy shit over your head, and then you will keep the mobility of the overhead stuff. Now, a good example for me, it's going to move away from my adductors for a minute, although pretty decent one. I've made excuses for years about why I can't do an overhead squat, and partially it's just because it's hard. It's really hard. A lot of training certifications, whatever, use an overhead squat as an assessment, which I think is insane because I've never seen anyone out the gate do a good one. So, like, so many things go wrong that we're going to have to break it down further anyway. So it's just kind of a waste of time for me to have anybody do an overhead squat because I'm just going to see 12 failure points and we're going to have to dive into those 12 failure points. So why don't we just do that from the first place, right? Anyway, that's my opinion. Now, if we look at once we gain access to it, though, it requires a ton of overhead extension because we need to be able to hold a fairly heavy weight overhead as you squat to full depth and come back up to top. The Olympics is happening right now. If you watch the Olympic weightlifting, if you watch them do a snatch, part of that is an overhead squat. They throw the bar up and over their head, they land into an overhead squat, and then press it up fully with their legs. So really hard movement. If you have access to that, all we would need to do to maintain everything from like hip to ankle to shoulder mobility is do some loaded overhead squats on a weekly basis. If you don't have access to those multiple ranges of motion, then all you're going to do from doing an overhead squat is hurt yourself, right? So been building up to do this over the past few months. I just needed a new stimulus. So I've been learning to do snatches. I've been learning to do these clean and jerk Olympic movements that I've never really done in my career. And it's been fun. It's been interesting. And it's also helped me get a lot more mobile. And it's going to also give me access to ranges of motion. So I don't have to do as much like dedicated mobility work. I can just do some of those movements and it will help me maintain the mobility I've built. For a lot of this stability and mobility stuff, I think we just overthink it so much. And part of it is much like we overthink running, or much like we overthink strength training, or overthink any aspect of sleep, food, whatever. It's because the effective stuff is just kind of boring and not all that interesting to talk about. And it kind of sucks. And if we just put in a little bit of the boring, unpleasant work, we would make infinitely bigger leaps. And then we could actually do some of the fun stuff, right? And I get it. I used to do this. This is how I used to end up doing like 2 to 3 hour workouts. 5 to 6 days a week because I just had a list of shit I needed to do, and then I just kept adding more shit to it. And it got out of hand. And it's like not every adaptation needs a specific exercise. Instead, let's program in a way where one movement can serve us multiple purposes. If you're unstable, then maybe we should do some Bulgarian split squats so we can build your glutes and your quads and your grip strength and your stability. If we have tight hamstrings, then if we're looking to, if we have tight hamstrings, then maybe we can do some slow Romanian deadlifts with a pause at the bottom. They'll build strength in hamstrings and glutes and low back and also stretching your hamstrings. Had a question live. Are you suggesting to include some basic Olympic lifting into any good strength training program? Absolutely not. They're really hard. I haven't done them for 15 years for a reason. They are a thing I want to do. I think that unless you want to learn to Olympic lift, then no, you absolutely don't need to do it. And probably it's a waste of your time. Um, if you can do them and if you want to put the work in to do them, they're incredible movements that serve multiple purposes. But like you are going to be doing nothing but lifting a broomstick and PVC for a little while, so you're going to take a pullback on other things, and it's a really difficult movement to learn. So unless you actually want to learn those movements, I wouldn't. I have never programmed a clean and jerk or snatch for any of the hundreds of people I've coached. It's just a thing I'm doing, and it's a good example of a thing that would serve multiple purposes. Really good question. Thanks, Tom. So big thing though is like, let's try and cross purpose because I know you're busy. Like most of us can't be training 3, 4, 5 hours a day. And with all the running and strength and mobility and flexibility and whatever else we have, it can easily add up. And then we still need to be able to eat and recover and hydrate and fuel and still have time to do like other hobbies and hang out with our families and go to work and whatever else. And it just ends up being too much. So before I close out, like one of my biggest pet peeves of anything in the fitness industry, but this was specifically a thing a lot of the time in rehab, is like PTs will often send patients home with like 45 minutes of exercises to do. And every day, to be clear, 45 minutes of exercises to do every day. And what that does is basically guarantees the person is not going to do any of them. And then the PT is going to complain that their patients never do any of their homework. And been there. I've definitely given people a bunch of homework to do for mobility, and then they don't do it. And I complain about lack of dedication or whatever. When it's actually my fault for programming too much shit for them to do in their free time. Um, instead, well, first, like this is just me. I'm really bad at doing a ton of stuff that someone wants me to do in my free time when we could find a more effective means. Like when I was in ninth grade, I didn't do like almost any math homework the whole year. And that's because I kept getting 100% on the tests and I had like 3 to 5 to more hours of homework every night from every other class. And since I clearly understood the material, it just didn't seem purposeful to me to do an insane amount of math homework when it wasn't serving the end goal, right? And I'm very lucky that that teacher was cool. He treated me out like an adult. We discussed consequences, gave me a break, etc. But same thing here with rehab, right? Like we cannot expect people to take that much time out of their already busy life and just constantly feel like a failure. If we can give someone 1, 2 movements that take 3 to 5 minutes and then do that, then that'd be much better. And then if you don't do it, you're being irresponsible because you absolutely have 5 minutes. And if you don't, let's like look at your screen time, right? So let's make sure that things actually fit. Training doesn't need to take over your life. And if we pair a lot of these stability and mobility and strength and et cetera, or even like downhill running with stability, we're going to get a lot more out of it because it's going to be a lot more sports specific and we're going to get a lot more cross purposes and the body will actually move like it's supposed to. And we'll just see a lot bigger benefit with a lot less time. Anyway, that's it for today. I'm going to do another one of these in this strength before we get to like how to program stuff. I'm going to do another one of these on like powers and plyometrics. Um, Fair warning before that happens, is something I'm actually actively learning. I've been playing with them myself. Sorry, someone I just said nice plant. Thank you. I like it too. I just signed up for like a short plyometrics course. I've been playing with them myself, and I've kind of learned I've been doing them not wrong, but definitely not as well as I could be. So if you listen to this and you're someone I'm currently coaching, fair warning, there's going to be more plyos once I figure out how to coach them and do them better. And for everybody else, I will share kind of what I'm learning in addition to the like power movements that I feel pretty confident in on how to do like actual plyometrics as well. Anyway, hope you have a great rest of your day and then go have some fun on the trails. See ya.